So, if I understand correctly, we're on Chapter 4, Text 28. Let me... Oh... Dravya yagyastapo yagyam. Dravya yagyastapo yagyam. Yoga yagyastatapare. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Dravya yagyastapo yagya. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Dravya yagyastapo yagya. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Anyone? Dravya yagyastapo yagyam. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Dravya yagyastapo yagya. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Dravya yagyastapo yagya. Yoga yagyastatapare. Svadhyaya jnana yagyascha. Yataya samshita vrataha. Dravya yagya. Sacrificing one's possessions. Tapa yagya. Sacrifice in austerities. Yoga yagya. Sacrifice in eightfold mysticism. Tata. Thus. Apare. Others. Svadhyaya. Sacrifice and study of the Vedas. Jnana yajña, sacrifice in advancement of transcendental knowledge. Cha, also. Yataya, enlightened persons. Samshita vrtaha, taken to strict vows. So here's the translation. Having accepted strict vows, some have become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So we can do the English translation responsibly. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. Now here's Prabhupada's purport. These sacrifices may be fitted into various divisions. There are persons who are sacrificing their possessions in the form of various kinds of charities. In India, the rich mercantile community or princely orders open various kinds of charitable institutions like the Dharmashala or Anakshetra or Atitheshala or Anatalaya or Vidyapita. In other countries too, there are many hospitals, old age homes, and similar charitable foundations meant for distributing food, education, and medical treatment free to the poor. All these charitable activities are called Dravyamaya Yajña. There are others who, for higher elevation in life or for promotion to higher planets within the universe, voluntarily accept many kinds of austerities, such as the Chandrayana or the Chaturmasa. These processes entail severe vows for conducting life under certain rigid rules. For example, under the Chaturmasya vow, the candidate does not shave for 4 months during the year, July to October. He does not eat certain foods, does not eat twice in a day, nor does not leave home. Such sacrifice of comforts of life is called Tapomaya Yajña. There are still others who engage themselves in different kinds of mystic yoga, like the Patanjali system for merging into the existence of the Absolute, or the Hatha Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga for particular perfections. And some travel to all the sanctified places of pilgrimage. All these practices are called Yoga Yajña, sacrifice for certain types of perfection in the material world. There are others who engage themselves in the studies of different Vedic scriptures or literatures, specifically the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutras, or the Sankhya philosophy. All of these are called Svadhyaya Yajña, or engagement in the sacrifice of studies. All these yogis are faithfully engaged in different types of sacrifice and are seeking a higher status of life. Krishna Consciousness, however, is different from these because it is direct service of the Supreme Lord. Krishna Consciousness cannot be attained by any one of the above mentioned types of sacrifice, but can be attained only by the mercy of the Lord and his bona fide devotees. Therefore, Krishna consciousness is transcendental. Dravya yagyastapo yagya, yoga yagyastapare, swadhyaya jnana yagyascha, yataya samshita vrataha. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. This section has always mystified me. So I've spent extra time trying to get a good grip on what's going on here in this part of Bhagavad Gita. And it's kind of an unusual section. It goes from 4.23 to 4.33, so it's 11 verses. These verses talk about Krishna consciousness in a way that we usually don't hear. I've made the point before that there are many metaphors you can use to describe Krishna consciousness. And it might appear that I'm speaking about very different things. But actually, these different metaphors are just different ways about speaking about the same thing, about becoming Krishna conscious. So, to give examples, if we talk about Krishna consciousness as becoming a lover of God, gradually awakening one's love for God, that's one way of talking about it. We can talk about Krishna consciousness also as rising above the modes of nature. We can talk about Krishna consciousness as engaging in austerities. We can talk about Krishna consciousness as getting full knowledge of Krishna. So it sounds as if we might be talking about different things. We can talk about Krishna consciousness as controlling the senses. So all these things superficially appear like very different things. Controlling the senses, becoming a lover of God, gaining knowledge, rising above the three modes of nature. These sound like very different things. But in fact, they're the same thing. And this is something that sometimes I think it takes some maturity in Krishna consciousness to finally come to the understanding that Krishna consciousness is not like a cookbook full of miscellaneous recipes or like an anthology of many works all put together by different authors. It's actually one whole, and all aspects of Krishna consciousness are meshed and connected to all other aspects of Krishna consciousness. So if you perfect Krishna consciousness from one angle of vision, you perfected it from all angles of vision. And the reason we look at Krishna consciousness from all these different angles is that by looking at Krishna consciousness from different angles, we get a very full and realized perspective of what we're really talking about, of what Krishna consciousness actually is. In this section, from 4.23 to 4.33, we are talking about Krishna from the perspective of Yajña, which is something we don't hear very often. Generally, when people give class about Krishna consciousness, they don't usually talk about Krishna consciousness from the perspective of Yajña. What is Yajña, actually? We have all these various examples, starting at verse 23 all the way up to verse 33 of 4th chapter, of people who are performing some kind of yajña. And yajña could be described in a simple way as doing something against our usual way of trying to enjoy our senses. So the natural inclination of human beings is to enjoy the senses. And, we've been doing that since day one. And it's impossible to stop enjoying the senses. However, if someone does only what the senses want, I think most people would get the realization that there is something degenerate, something that is not very conducive if we just do what the senses want. Everybody likes to eat, but if we eat too much, we eat too much of the wrong things, we eat at the wrong times, it's quite obvious that we will become physically harmed by that. We know that there are a lot of things that humans like to do. They like to sleep, they like to have sex, they like to get intoxicated. Humans like to party and have big festivals, enjoy themselves. So these are natural inclinations of the senses enjoying their objects. But it's quite plain, most people will realize that if you only do those things, your health will be degraded, your consciousness will be degraded, and a lot of bad things will start to happen. Of course, people who are teenagers, they can't imagine why it is that older people refrain from doing whatever they want to do. So usually people who are teenagers, the minute they get enough distance from the control of the parents, immediately try to do everything they've always wanted to do in the proportion they've always wanted to do them in, sleep as much as they wanted, eat as much as they wanted, party as much as they wanted, So, and this works out for a short time until the inevitable crunch of reality hits home and we start realizing that parts of the body are starting to malfunction in serious ways. So there's something strange about the fact that humans want to enjoy. We hear in Vedanta Sutra, Anandamaya Bhyasat, that the living entity is pleasure-seeking. However, if we only seek material pleasure in the form of sense objects, meaning their senses, then we find the body is degraded by that. So that's kind of paradoxical, that we want to enjoy the senses, but if we only enjoy the senses, we find that the body becomes degraded by it. So now we come to the concept of Yajña, which means going against the senses in some way. And here, in these 11 verses, Krishna describes various Vedic formulas for going against the senses. So the central key concept for Yajña is going against the senses. Now, you may be going against the senses because you know that it's healthy to not give in to the senses all the time. Or you may be going against the senses because you're trying to please the Supreme Lord. Now, if you're doing it for the latter reason, that is a higher understanding than just going against the senses because you know the senses are leading you into a dysfunctional life if you just give in to them without restriction. So, Krishna, in the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, is describing to Arjuna a number of different spiritual approaches. That's what we have been speaking out about in many different talks that we've been giving. Krishna, in the first 6 chapters, gives different approaches. And these approaches are there in the Vedas. And if you go to India today, you will see people applying these different approaches. Now, there's nothing to say that these approaches are equal, that any one of them will lead you to the same position. We don't say that. Nor, as Prabhupada mentioned in this purport, they will not all lead you to the highest thing. So, my next sort of analogy is a target. Maybe you've all seen in archery or maybe in other weapons like firing guns. There's a target and then there's a smaller circle and a smaller circle and a smaller circle. And finally, very middle, there is a bullseye. And the object of shooting arrows or shooting a gun or whatever is to hit the bullseye. That's where we want to get. So what is the bullseye of spiritual activity? What's the real center goal of spiritual activity? In the 4th chapter here, Krishna hasn't gotten around to saying it, but in the 6th chapter he will. And with all these different approaches, we can see that there is a less focused, a less effective version, like at the very outside of the target. And we have a much more effective, a much more focused understanding in the middle. And then at the very bullseye, we have finally the most focused and the most effective. So Krishna will say in the 6th chapter, that of all kinds of things, Krishna is asking Arjuna to be a yogi. Tapas vibhyo diko yogi, karmibhyo pi matodikaha, or no, it's tapas vibhyo diko yogi, jnanibhyo pi matodikaha, karmibhyas chadiko yogi, tasmad yogi bhavarjuna, if I can get the verse right. So, better than the person who is performing tapa or austerities, better than the one who is performing jnana, better than the one who is performing karma, is the yogi. So Arjuna, please be a yogi. That's what Krishna is asking Arjuna in the 6th chapter, at the very end of the 6th chapter. And then he says, Yoginim api sarvesham madgantenan taratmanam shadavan bhajate yomam yome same yuktatamo mataha. So that of all yogis, one who always meditates on me is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So this is what Krishna is saying in the 6th chapter. So we hear about these various rings, the outside ring, the closer still ring, and finally the bullseye. And in the bullseye, we find that he's asking Arjuna to be a yogi, not to be a tapasvi, not to be a karmi, not to be a jnani, but to be a yogi. So these are various paths: the path of yoga, the path of karma, the path of tapa or austerity. And then once Arjuna realizes he needs to be a yogi, then Krishna says what kind of yogi he wants Arjuna to be. Not a meditational yogi, but one who always thinks of me within himself. That kind of yogi. So that yogi is not necessarily a meditative yogi. It's a different kind of yogi. What kind of yogi is that? That's a bhakti yogi, one who is always thinking of Krishna. So this theme is there in Bhagavad Gita in the first 6 chapters. There are many approaches. So we've talked here about the approach of tapa or austerity, the approach of jnana, of speculative knowledge, and the approach of karma, which is fruit of activity. And Krishna is telling Arjuna that these are inferior. These are approaches to spiritual life, but they're inferior. And if you look in the Vedas, you will find the regulations and the details of how to be a tapasvi, someone who is engaged in austerity. You will learn how to become a jnani, how to perform various kinds of speculation, and you will find how to become a karmi, how to do various fruitive activities. So these things are listed in the Vedas, but in the end, Krishna doesn't recommend them. If you go to India today, you will find people who are doing these things. You will see some people who are performing extreme austerities. You will find some people who are fruitive workers. They're doing various kinds of fruitive activities, as mentioned in the Vedas. And you will find people who are jnanis, people who are studying various kinds of mental approaches. Now, in these verses from 23 to 33, we have a whole group of other we're looking at it even with a greater degree of precision and detail in this section. So we're hearing that there are various other types of people who are performing Yajña. So now we're talking about yajña, ways that people go against the grain of following what the senses want us to do. Ways that people go against the grain of following the senses. So this is yajña. And in this verse, we hear about dravya. Now, dravya is a Sanskrit word that means ingredient, it means subject or object, it also means something that is to be acted upon. So we have these various dravya. So we have, as Prabhupada puts it, two great categories. We have Dravyamaya Yajña, and we have Jnanamaya Yajña. So Dravyamaya Yajña is a sacrifice of things, and Jnanamaya Yajña is a sacrifice of knowledge. So what are examples of these? Krishna is giving us examples in these 10 verses. So an example of Dravyamaya Yajña, as Prabhupada said, are these physical austerities, like giving in charity. You're taking something that you have and you're giving it to someone else. Dravyamaya Yajña. Then Prabhupada mentions this, what's it called? Chandrayana. Yeah, Chandrayana. So I looked that up, and what Chandrayana is during the phases of the moon, we start with a full moon, and as the moon wanes, it gets less and less, the darkness covers the moon. One also simultaneously eats less. So as the moon wanes, one's eating wanes, and presumably, I guess, when you get to the dark moon, you're not eating anything. And then when it goes the other way, it gets into the waxing moon, then you start eating more as it goes back, and so by the full moon, you're eating normally again. So this is the Chandrayana Yajña. So the dravya in this case, or the object that we are giving up, is food. So that's the concept there. And then we have Chaturmas. So in 4 different months in the year, in each month, there is a food substance that one avoids that month, like shak or spinach in one month, and then yogurt another month, and then milk, and I forget what the other one is. There's Erdal. So each month one does not eat any foods that have those in them. So again, Dravyamaya Yajña. This is giving up of things. So what's an example of Jnanamaya Yajña? That's giving up your time in knowledge, like Prabhupada describes here, Svadhyaya Yajña. Svadhyaya is what one mentally meditates upon, usually in regard to Scripture. So what we're doing right now is a type of Svadhyaya Yajña. So we're hearing Bhagavad Gita, and we're meditating upon it. So if somebody studies Scripture, if someone memorizes verses, if somebody tries to understand philosophy, discussing it with somebody else, this is Jnanamaya Yajña, or a sacrifice in knowledge. And Prabhupada kind of generally classifies all kinds of yajña into one of these 2 big categories. But there's a lot of smaller categories. So in these 10 verses from 23 to 33, here's some examples that we have. So in 25, we hear about people worshiping demigods. Daivim Yajña. So one is offering various oblations or activities, or usually they're offering some type of puja to the demigods. The purpose is to please the demigod, and of course then to ask some benediction from the demigod. So Daivim Yajña. So worshiping demigods. We see in India people are doing this. That there are a lot of people who go to various temples, and even in New York City, there are numbers of Hindu temples. You can go there and you'll see people all day long going in with flowers, bags of rice, some cases, incense. What else do they usually bring? Figs or dates, and so on and so forth. Grapes, milk they bring and they put on the altar. Sometimes they pay a particular pujari to perform some particular sacrifice. And so this is a type of yajna. One is giving up, but one is giving up something for a higher purpose. We have in 426, we have Swadhyaya Yajna, hearing about Vedic knowledge. And we also hear about how the householders control their senses. So when a person marries and has just one wife or one husband and controls the senses to just be focused on the one person, then that is a type of yajna. And in this case, we could call that Indriya Samyama Yajna. So we are controlling the senses. This is a type of yajna. And that was mentioned in verse 26. In verse 27, we hear about yogis controlling the breathing. And they're controlling the breathing to control the mental activities. And this is pratyahara maya yajna. So pratyahara is controlling the actual workings of the mind through breathing. So we are controlling through breath, but we're not just controlling the breath, we're trying to control the actual process of the mental activity. Then we hear in 28 sacrificing possessions, which is also dravyamaya yajna, austerities, which we call tapamaya yajna, and the eightfold yoga mystical system, and studying the Vedas. So this is what, in this verse, we're hearing, all these different kinds of yajna. So performing austerities, sacrificing possessions, doing the eightfold yoga, studying various Vedic literatures, and then later in next verse, 29, we're going to hear about pranayama. So this means controlling the breath itself, as the yogis do, where they expand the chest when they breathe out, which should be the opposite, and they contract the chest when they breathe in, which should be the opposite. And so this is a type of yajña. We're giving up something. In each case, there is a uphill climb. The person is doing something that's a little different than what they would naturally be inclined to do. Something that's not quite so comfortable, something that's not quite so pleasing to the senses, but there's a purpose in it. And of course, depending on how conscious a person is of what that purpose is how advanced they are in spiritual life. Because just as we were talking a minute ago, there's this target, with the outside of the target, the middle, the more closer in, and finally the bullseye. So a person who is just controlling the senses with a sense of trying to be healthy, that's on the outside of the target. Or a person who's controlling the senses with the idea that they would like to help others, altruism, that's kind of on the outside of the target. If somebody's controlling the senses and they are following the Vedas, that means they accept that there is some control or order in the universe. That's a higher thing. It's more aware of the real way things work. And then someone may be actually controlling the senses to please a specific demigod, which is even higher on. Now we're actually pleasing an individual. Then we can understand that actually better than pleasing the demigods is controlling the senses to please the Supreme, although we don't have a clear idea of who the Supreme is. That's higher in the target. And finally, we're controlling the senses because we're trying to please and serve the Supreme Lord Krishna, which is finally the center bullseye. So, all these things are there, and the Vedas are a huge assortment of various literatures that describe all these processes. But again, these processes are not equal, nor do all these processes end you at the same place. And as with the target, depending on how clear you are about what you're doing and why you're doing it, is whether you hit the bullseye or you're satisfied with just hitting the side of the target somewhere or another. And so in one sense, all these things do kind of gradually point you towards the bullseye. But you might be moving towards the bullseye in a very slow way. And that's why if one engages in bhakti yoga, one immediately goes to the bullseye. Even if one doesn't have full knowledge, even if one is not very austere, even if one is not very devoted to God, one practicing bhakti yoga will be on a fast track to heading towards the bullseye. Prabhupada once used the example of if you go into a skyscraper, you can walk up the stairs one by one all the way to the top, or you can take the elevator and go straight up all the way from the very bottom floor. And so bhakti yoga is like taking the elevator. So even if you aren't aware of what you're doing or why you're doing it, even if you aren't very austere, even if you have no real sentiment for God, even if you don't know what yajña is, simply by engaging in Bhagavad Gita, in Bhakti Yoga, you will be on the fast track. So that's what Krishna will get around to explaining to Arjuna in the 6 chapters I just mentioned. So I'll stop there for right now and see if there are any questions about that. This is kind of a mysterious section of Bhagavad Gita. I've always wanted to try to get to better understand this this part because it's always been so opaque to me. But now I'm starting to understand how this idea of yajña figures into the whole picture. So we can talk about Krishna consciousness as I said in the beginning, rising in the modes of nature. We can talk about Krishna consciousness as becoming a lover of God. We can talk about Krishna consciousness as controlling the senses. And, as we realize today, we can talk about Krishna consciousness in the terms of various kinds of yajña, or sacrifice. In other words, moving against the normal tendency of all human beings to enjoy their senses for a reason. That reason might be a high reason, or it might be a very mundane, sort of not very important reason. But in any case, one is moving against the usual tendency to just satisfy the senses under all circumstances. Any questions? Yes. Let me get someone to... Gaurav, can you be my microphone man? Hold the microphone to people when they're speaking. Don't give it to them, because people do crazy things with the microphone when you give it to them, because they're focusing on speaking.
So more like a comment. So in Krishna consciousness we have this 9 type of practices, which are our yajña. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, right. So if we're talking about bhakti yoga, then naturally the next question is, well, what is bhakti yoga? And of course, as you said, Yugala Priti, that bhakti yoga is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Bandham, Dasyam, Atmini, Bidenam. So there are 9 practices: hearing, chanting, remembering. We have serving the lotus feet, worshiping, and praying. And then we have becoming a servant, becoming a friend, and surrendering everything. So these are 9 practices. So just as the regular yoga system has, 8 steps, or 8 parts, the yam, niyam, hatha, pranayam, pratyahara, et cetera, et cetera. So the bhakti yoga system also has its steps, or its various aspects. And because the human mind is what it is, it's hard for a human to just do the same thing moment after moment, day after day. So the bhakti yoga system is so arranged that we don't have to do the same thing moment after moment, day after day. We segue back and forth between sometimes singing, sometimes working, sometimes chanting, sometimes discussing, sometimes engaged in deity worship, sometimes engaged in a kirtan, etc., etc. So these 9 processes of devotional service are arranged in such a way that we can segue between one to another, to another, to another. And in this way, the whole day through, we can be involved in Krishna consciousness without that much difficulty. Gaurav. No, Yugala Priti's.
So that's still that's how you connect yajña with Krishna consciousness, because we're talking about, you said that you're looking into yajña.
Right.
In these
So,
verses. And
yeah, so from the standpoint of Krishna consciousness, we were saying that a person performing some kind of more mundane type of yajña is to some extent motivated by material motivation. Either they're trying to increase their health, or they feel a sense of wanting to be known as an altruist, or they're wanting to please a demigod. These are all mundane versions of why a person does something that they don't want to do, or gives up something that they do want to do. These are all mundane, but when a person finally comes to the bullseye, they realize that what we're trying to do is to please Krishna. So we're giving up our motivation to live a life based on what we want to do, and we're trying to live a life based on what Krishna wants from us. And that is the highest concept of yajña, of sacrifice. So that doesn't mean that we're always doing things we don't want to do, but it does mean that we are focused on what Krishna wants. And by being focused on what Krishna wants, then automatically we find that, strangely, we are satisfied in the process. We are putting Krishna first, but that doesn't mean we don't eat anymore. It doesn't mean that we eat only terrible things. It doesn't mean that we live outside naked in the cold or anything like that. But what it does mean is that we are taking our lives and our senses, and what are we sacrificing? We are sacrificing our personal sense of what I want to do with my life in the world, which is probably the biggest sacrifice that people make, because everybody has some pipe dream about how they will become happy in the world by various material strategies. That's in the back of everybody's mind, is this is how I plan to be happy in the world, by this various material strategies. And we go about our merry way year after year trying to make that work. And it never quite does, because that's the way material life is. It never allows anything to work. And we feel frustrated. And strangely enough, when we give that up and we try to reorient our lives to please Krishna and figure out how we can live a life that basically pleases Krishna, then it doesn't mean that we're constantly engaged in horrific austerities, like the people who are doing tapomaya yajña. But it does mean that we're putting Krishna first. And because we're putting Krishna first, we are figuring out how to use our lives in a general, basic way to please Krishna. And then everything else follows from that. Whereas everybody else, even if they might be performing austerities, you have people in India who stand on one leg for years. Usually they go by a tree and they get a little thing and they hang it from the tree, so it helps them to stand on one leg. And then the other leg withers, and they get some mystic power from that. Now, that person may seem like they're performing extreme austerities, but what's their purpose? Their purpose is to get some mystic power, which is not to please God. So even though that's a physical austerity, that's a dravya maya yajña, they're giving up something physical comforts. But why are they doing it? Not to please the Supreme Lord or to please a person. They're pleasing themselves by doing what is understood in the Vedic system as austerities to gain various mystic power. So by performing an austerity, we get mystic power. So the devotees are not performing austerities to get mystic power. They're performing what austerities are necessary in the process of pleasing the Supreme Lord. So that's the difference, People who are less focused are out on the outside of the target, and those who are more focused are in on the center bullseye. And if you're in on the center bullseye, your whole life will work out. You'll go back home, back to Godhead. If you're on the outside, Who knows? Maybe you'll go back to Godhead, maybe you won't. Maybe you will at some point recognize that you are really not going anywhere. Your wheels are stuck in the mud. You need to get dug out somehow or another. Or maybe you won't realize that. So that's the whole point. That the Vedas are vast. They describe all these things. But again, these things are not equal. You can't say that they're all as effective as one another, which many commentators on Bhagavad Gita do try to put across, this idea that anything you do is as good as anything else. It's not. Some things are better, and Bhakti Yoga is the best. It takes you right to the center, and you know the center of the target. People may again accuse us of being some kinds of chauvinists about our process. I mean, it's a natural way of pointing the finger at somebody who says our process is best. But we have a clear idea of what we're doing. We have a clear idea of why we're doing it. And if somebody wants to, they can, give the reasons for their goal. But you can find out a lot about anybody by just asking the simple question of what's the goal of your life? Most people never even thought about that question. What's the goal of your life, If you ask a person what the goal of their life is, and they tell you, then you know a lot about that person right away. Most people don't know the goal of life should be to become intimately united with God in service. That's the goal of life. Most people who are religious, if you would say that, the goal of life is to love God, most people would agree, at least superficially. But whether their life actually reflects a clear and targeted process to get to that stage, that's another issue. Any other questions?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So, what's the difference between, like we say sense gratification, but from another like materialistic perspective, it may be enjoyment. They may call it enjoyment. So, I mean, I myself think like that. So,
well, sense gratification, enjoyment is the same thing.
It's the same.
However, I think sometimes people get the idea that we're not supposed to enjoy anything, which is not exactly Krishna consciousness. It's said that, that this knowledge is Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pavitram, Idam Uttamam, Pratyat Savagamam, Dharmyam, Shushukam, Kartamavyayam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the highest knowledge because it gives direct perception of the self by realization. It's the perfection of religion. It's everlasting and joyfully performed. So, when we are serving Krishna, because our senses are being used for Krishna's purposes, then we are enjoying and Krishna is enjoying. Or we could put it the other way around, Krishna is enjoying and we're enjoying. We're not trying to stop enjoying, we're just trying to please Krishna. And compare that to those people who are trying to do the path of tapa or austerity. They are certainly doing things that they don't like to do, and they may be extreme, but their purpose is not to please God. Whereas on our side, we are doing the process of pleasing Krishna, but nothing says that we have to suffer at every moment, nor are we supposed to, live in some kind of deprived condition, that we have, as Srimad Bhagavatam explains, that one should satisfy the senses as much as necessary, but not beyond that. So the purpose of life is to please Krishna. We should have a healthy body. We should keep our body fit. We shouldn't let it get malnourished or debilitated in some way by improper sleep or improper eating or improper something else. And we should have a place to live. Doesn't have to be a palace, but all these things are the way that we look at the process of bhakti. We're not the process of austerity. We're the process of bhakti. So the process of bhakti means we satisfy the senses as much as necessary, but not more. We're not trying to blow out the senses in every way that they want to be satisfied. However, in some cases and sometimes, we might have to do some kind of austerity, because that's the nature of the way things work in the world. But sometimes we have to perform some kind of austerities. When there's a fast day, or when there's a special festival, or when we have to organize something or work to organize something, then we might have to eat less or sleep less. We might have to go through some phase like that. And that's all part of pleasing Krishna. But we're not trying to, rack up some mega austerity points, et cetera, et cetera. Was that what you were asking about? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Just hold the microphone, please. It should be on, don't...
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
It's on.
My kind question is that the processes which you mentioned, like Chandrayaan processes, or the processes which you mentioned as like Chandrayaan processes, or
right.
giving up food, or giving up some education like this, does this help one to become Krishna conscious one day?
Yes, in a general way it does, but we always give people the overall understanding that if one directly takes to Krishna consciousness, it supersedes all that, That's the nature of the Vedas. The Vedas tell us a simple way to get right to business, But if someone has some hang-up, then there's these other things, And this is more detail, the explanation is more detailed in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna has this, sort of step ladder. He says that always think of me, he's got in verse 12:8, the highest is to always be focused on Krishna, which is a very high level of Krishna consciousness. Then if you can't do that, then stage 2 is to engage in the process of bhakti yoga to develop a desire to attain to me. That's 12:10. Then 12:11 is, well, if you can't do that, then work for me. So that's a little further out. Now, why is it that someone can't always focus on Krishna? And that is because all of us have spent too many lifetimes ignoring God, and we just can't always think about Krishna. Our minds are too distracted, and we have too many desires for that to work. But what can work is bhakti yoga. Then, as we were saying, we have 9 processes we were talking about with Yugala Priti here, that they're different processes. So you keep doing different processes. In this way, you're thinking about Krishna, but in different ways, with a different kind of activity. So it's easy for the mind to do. But if for some reason we still have heavy material desires and we just can't latch on to Krishna consciousness, then we just work for Krishna. by working for Krishna. We give up some of our fruits to Krishna. We associate with Krishna devotees as much as we can. It's further out on the target than the center point. It's further out. And then some people, because of either prejudice or family members or something like that, Prabhupada explains, they can't be associated with Krishna consciousness. So they have to just perform some welfare work, which is a very slow road, and it may not be at all effective, So the reason why these other processes exist is because people have some kind of hang-up. It can be that they still are convinced somehow or other in the material world we can find happiness out here by banging it out every day, And as long as a person is convinced material happiness is real, and some way you can find it out there in New York City if you just work hard enough, then Krishna consciousness just doesn't take off, But one day everybody comes to that conclusion that the Big Apple ain't out there in the Big Apple, that you just will never get it. It's always that, well, I almost got it, but not quite. There's just some fly in the ointment. There's this hollow ring to everything that we try to do in the material world. And one day, that realization dawns on everybody, and then we are serious about devotional service after that. But before that point, we think, well, it's a good thing, but I'll do it next week or something like that. But right now, I want to do this and that and the other, and that's why Krishna has all this other stuff, doing Chandrayana, there are all these various festivals that come up, where, and Prabhupada told us about them, people who fast, people who do various kinds of special yajñas or chant extra during a certain time, or they follow the Chaturmasya or whatever it is. These are things that will, if we do them in the right mood, may eventually inspire us to become full devotees, which means we chant 16 rounds, we get initiated, we're performing daily sadhana, But if we're already doing those things, these other things have not so much importance, These things are less important. So that's the whole idea, that everything on the target kind of points towards the bullseye. But as the farther you get out on the edge of the target, the less likelihood that in a near future you'll wind up at the bullseye. It could still happen, but there's no reason not to shoot for the bullseye right away. And the bullseye is Krishna consciousness, Otherwise, you can worship demigods, you can bring milk and put it in front of the deities, you can, get a purohit and do some havan in your house and do various purifying rituals and get rid of evil spirits and, try to see that your business will prosper. Or you can perform these weird austerities that some people do, et cetera, et cetera. All these things, they have some benefit to them, but the best is straight on Krishna consciousness. And that's why Krishna is explaining all these various details, because after explaining them all to Arjuna, now he's going to tell Arjuna, this is what I really want you to do. And you can forget about this. And this is what Krishna means by sarva dharma parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja, is don't worry with all this stuff. If you have somehow or another come to the point where you're convinced you should be doing bhakti yoga, just do bhakti yoga. Don't worry about all that other stuff, about sinful activities, doing prayaschitta or worshiping demigods or performing weird austerities or doing the yoga practice or learning how to control your breathing and all this stuff is there. And if you go to India, you'll find people who are doing that, or people who are learning how to become depersonalized in meditation, all this kind of stuff. Don't worry about all that. That's all farther out on the outside of the target. We want to go to the center bullseye. Okay, so we're probably, 6 minutes over or something like that. Is that right? Okay. So any final questions, and then we'll wrap up and we'll do a kirtan. Yeah, can you... Gaurav, can you... Don't give him...
So, how I understand by your explanation, so yagi actually it's like leaving your comfort zone, right?
Yeah, right.
In general, right? So when we practice bhakti yoga, so two devotees, one prefers, for example, enjoy prasadam, and another one go outside for books distribution. So probably in this way, that one who distribute books, right? So he get more advanced, so like...
Right.
Am I correct, right?
Right. So that's why we find that of all yajñas, Sankirtan yajña is the highest yajña in the present time, because it not only benefits the individual doing it, it benefits the person receiving it, it benefits the country or the place where a person is doing it, all those things at the same time. So that's the highest, of all types of yajña. So, in one sense, Sankirtan Yajña is at the center bullseye of the Yajña, target. So, we have these kind of vague sort of, altruistic or, self-help things all the way to the center where you're doing Sankirtan Yajña, which is the perfection of Yajña. Okay, so are you going to play drum or shall? Okay.
Maharaj, I had one last
Okay.
question. So you mentioned the series of the verses, this series of the verses where Krishna describes all the yajñas, and then he says that Shreyan Dravyamayad Yajña Gyan Yajña Parantapa, that like better than this, like Dravya Yajña is like the Jnana Yajña, like of knowledge. So
right.
So, but
right.
So that's the question. Like, is
that's
that different than Bhakti
33,
Yoga?
I think
or
it is. Is
like
that what you're?
Yeah,
going?
but this. Yeah, I think it's the.
Yeah, let me go there. You're right. Oh, chastise it. It says, Shreyan Dravya Mayad Yagyaj Jnanam Yagya Parantapa Sarvam Karma Kilam Partha Jnane Parisamapyate. O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of possessions. After all, O son of Pritha, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. So that is 33. That's the last of this section. And so what Krishna is saying there is that giving Dravya Maya Yajña, so as Prabhupada was explaining, we're putting all the kinds of yajña into two basic bins. One of them is Dravya Maya Yajña, and the other is Jnana Maya Yajña. So Dravya Maya Yajña means giving up things, and Jnana Maya Yajña is using your intelligence or sacrificing the time that your intelligence is doing on some kind of spiritual thing. So if a person is performing Dravya Maya Yajña by giving up things, they should eventually come to the platform of recognizing the importance of Jnana Maya Yajña, and that's what that verse is saying. So Jnanamaya Yajña is, of course, again, just like Yajña has various circles, so Jnana has various circles. At the very outside of Jnana, you have just basic knowledge that you're not this body. That's not very, it's, most people don't even have that, but basic knowledge that you're not this body. And then you go further in where you discover that there is some organizational principle in the universe. We're not sure what it is, but some kind of organizational principle. And then you get further, then you know there's a God, but you don't know much about what God is all about. And then finally, you discover God is Krishna, and he has these forms, and Bhakti Yoga is the way to reach him. And then you've gotten to the center of the bullseye. So Jnana also has those kind of various circles. So in general, what this series of verses is bringing us around to is the idea that of the two, Jnanamaya Yajña is superior to Dravyamaya Yajña. Okay.